Hi, welcome back to Gillian at Mystic Healing Therapies. So today's video it's the 26th of January 2022. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the difference between heart-centered power and ego-centered power. So everybody is born with an ego, so we need to have an ego in order to navigate being a human being on earth. So there's nothing wrong in having an ego, but it's when this ego starts to become overinflated and out of control that it causes us problems, because then we might make decisions in life that are to protect our ego, which invariably isn't necessarily helpful, or it won't steer us onto our life path. So it's about learning to sort of recognize when it's our ego talking and when it's our higher self or more wise heart-centered self that is talking. So let me just give you an example. Quite often, if we're quite ego-based and ego-driven, we will really have to always feel like we are in the right. So if somebody criticizes our opinion, we feel very defensive, we feel very much like there's a right or a wrong, there's a definite right or wrong, and we need to stick to our rightness and prove that we're right. So that's the ego wanting to remain intact and prove that my point of view is right. If we're more heart-centered in our thinking, we can accept that everyone has an opinion. It's not right or wrong, it's just where we're sitting and where we're seeing it from. So another example of ego is, let's say we've got a successful person that had got highly educated, a good job, a good house. Nothing wrong with that in itself. That's not ego driven. You know, it could be, I've worked really hard, this is where I've got, and I've got the fruits of my labor. That's not ego driven. But where ego would come into it is if that same individual thinks, oh, I'm far cleverer than everybody else, I'm much better than them because I have a big house and a nice car. That's where the ego kicks in. So it's not necessarily the fact that, you know, you've got nice things and you've got a successful life. That doesn't equate to having an ego. It's attaching the but I'm superior. And this happens in all fractions of life. It's not about sort of your station, to use an old-fashioned word. It's not about where you are in society. It's just how you navigate what's going on in your world. So quite often people think that outgoing, gregarious people might have a large ego, but that's not necessarily the case. Just because you're outgoing and gregarious doesn't necessarily mean you've got a large ego. It could be that the people that are quieter and shy have got a bigger ego because they don't want to open themselves up to any criticism, so they have a sort of more inward life. That's not to say that everybody that's quiet and shy has got a big ego, by the way, but I'm just saying that the general consensus is that outgoing people are, oh, she's full of herself, oh, he loves himself. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Anyway, I think it's great if people love themselves. Okay, so what would that look like in a few day-to-day examples? So quite recently I was on a human rights event, let's just call it, a demonstration for human rights and freedom, let's just call it that, or a petition for human rights and freedom. And I was holding a placard. Now, I'm dyslexic, and I'd got on the message that I'd got on my placard, I'd got 2 letters mixed up because I'm dyslexic. And somebody who was equally on the human rights event, so they weren't opposing the event, but they had to come up to me and say, you've spelt that wrong, that should be that. And they were really excited to tell me this, that, you know, they were stepping in their ego power to prove that they were right. You know, the ego has to be right, and it has to prove to everybody that it's right and superior. So my reaction to that was just, okay, I'm dyslexic. Did you understand what the message said? And they said, yes. I said, well, is that not all that matters? And I just asked the person the question. So I believe that that was an ego-centered, that comment in the first place was ego-centered. So the ego likes to prove mistakes, point out other people's mistakes, whether, you know, it's that sense of superiority. You've spelt that wrong and I need to correct you. So, you know, it wasn't an educational setting, it wasn't a specific work event, it was just a human rights meeting, let's just say. So it didn't really need correcting, did it? But that was somebody's ego feeling the need to jump in and correct it. A heart-centered response to that might have been, oh, that person spelt that wrong, but I still know what it means, and carry on. So that's just a few examples. You know, the ego always has to correct people, always has to be right, because it gives that person a sense of superiority in some ways. So, you know, it is about superiority, feeling you've got to inflate the ego and add to the ego. Whereas a heart-centered is just, there's no right or wrong in all this. You know, there's nobody's opinion's right or wrong. It's just where they are on their spectrum of events, what their life experiences have brought to them, what their position of light is, you know, in how much wisdom they have. So when we can see that it's not necessarily that somebody's right or wrong, that would be more in your heart-centered power. So it's more accepting of others, not having to prove that you are right or you are better. It's just an acceptance of where everybody is at this moment as where they're supposed to be. So it's not so much a judgment, it's more a feeling, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to share that. It was just a quick video today. What a beautiful day we've got. You know, we're moving out of, soon to be in February. What a wonderful world we live in. I've just was looking this morning at the birds in my garden. As you can see, I live in the countryside and we get lots of pheasants, we get so many birds, and they just lift my heart. I just love to see them. But one thing that I thought, there was 2 pheasants that come in, and they come in every day, and they were pecking around on the floor, and that's where they get their nourishment from. But then I saw some blue tits up in the tree, and they were all in the little crevices of the tree, and I thought to myself, this was a good example of dimensional living. You know, the beautiful pheasants were getting their nourishment from the floor, and their whole perception of my garden's totally different. But the blue tits were up in the trees, in the crevices, in the little holes. So we're in the same space, but our experiences are so different. The experience of the pheasant was so different to the experience of the blue tit, and yet we're all in the same space. So I thought, really, that's quite a good analogy for where we all are in life. We all share this planet. We're all on a life path, but we're all on a very different life path, even though we're sharing the same space. So it just led me to think about dimensional space and how we all have so different experiences of it. But again, there isn't a right or wrong. So tying this into this ego thing that I've just talked about, you wouldn't necessarily say the pheasant was any superior to the blue tit. Massively different in size, all the same species, if you like. So we're all human beings from the same source, just like the birds are all the same from the source and the same species. But you wouldn't necessarily say the pheasant was superior to the blue tit, even, you know. So there isn't a right or wrong. There's no superiority or inferiority. It's just where we all are. But judging people to be better or worse, that's when you get into the ego-centered mind, and rather than heart-centered. Okay, I'll leave that with you today. Have a good day and speak to you soon. Thanks for listening. Bye.